All right, so here's the next step. And I just find this interesting to take what we already know about Go and try to use that to start creating HTML files, right? And so we did this right here where we concatenated two strings together and then printed them. And that was pretty cool. And then we used the command line interface, right? And we did pipelining and just said, hey, dump the output of this operation when this file runs, dump the output of that operation, dump it into this file, and it created that file at the command line. So here's a challenge for you. And I give you challenges just to give you a chance to work the code yourself at your keyboard, because that is the best way to learn in my experience for myself and watching a lot of other students. So here's the challenge. Given what you already know about the Go programming language, okay, I want you to output the same code to an HTML file, but I want you to do it in Go, not by using the command line interface and pipelining stuff into a file and having it created through the command line interface. I want you to create a file in Go and then take the contents of this concatenation, these strings, and put them into that file. So that's the challenge. All right, so pause the video and try it. So now, here is the solution. And so the solution is, and let's just get rid of that file so that when we see it run, we have the variable, the name, right? So that's a string. And then we have another string, and this string variable is being created right with this right here. So we're using format sprint. And format sprint is string printing, right? So instead of just print, where it's printing to standard out, or print line, or printf, printing to standard out, format sprint takes stuff and prints it to a string. So it prints it to a string. So it gives us a string, and we're assigning it to this variable right there. Right? So that will create a string, print all that, concatenate, give it to this variable. So now we want to pass that in and put it into a file. So we use oscreate to create a file. It gives us a file, pointer to a file and an error. We check the error. If there's error, we log it, and we use log fatal, which shuts the program down. And we defer closing the file, because we open a file, we need to close it. And then we use IO copy. And we copy, IO copy takes a writer and a reader. And so a pointer to a file is a writer. It implements, a pointer to the file implements the writer interface. So just trying to say that correctly. A pointer to a file implements the writer interface. And a string does not implement the reader interface. But if you wrap it in strings new reader, it does. So we use strings new reader to take that string and have it implement the reader interface. And then we pass that in to IO copy, and IO copy copies the contents of this, it reads it, and then writes it to that. All right, so that's the essence of how that worked. And when we see it run, I'm just going to clear that out and run it again. Right, it should produce that file, and there's that file, and there's all of our HTML. And we could just serve that again right there, and perfect. So that's serving it through WebStorm. So WebStorm will automatically serve files. And if you want to learn about the different editors and how WebStorm works, again, I cover all that in my Introduction to Go Programming language course. Yeah. And if you want to take that course, I can give you an access code to that. It's in the link of the resources. So here, resources, you could get into that course for $9 right there. Since you're already in this course, I'll give you access to that course for $9. And then you could go watch the videos about editors and everything like that if you're a little confused about, whoa, how did WebStorm do that? All right, so now what I want to do is I sort of want to step through how oscreate, log fatal, defer, IO copy, writers, readers, interfaces. I want to step through all of that. So if you feel solid on all those things, stop the video right now and go on to the next video. But if you want a little bit of a review about, the standard library, different packages in it, readers and writers and interfaces, and how all that works together, stay here and we'll go through that. All right, so now let's go through it. We have oscreate, and we could go see oscreate in the standard library. So we're at godoc.org, and now you can find you can find documentation for the standard library at both godoc.org and golang.org. At godoc.org, you have package for the standard library, or you have documentation for the standard library, and you have documentation for third-party packages. That's at godoc.org. At golang.org, you only have documentation for the standard library. So we're at godoc.org, and here's documentation for the OS package, which is from the standard library. And when I look down, here is func create, and notice it's under type file. And so one thing which is interesting about that is even though it's like under type file, it's just kind of categorized with that. And when you call it, it's just still os.create. It's not like os.file.create. It's just os.create. And it's organized under file because it's related to file functions. And so that's just the organization of the documentation. All right, so we have we run os.create, and we give it a name of the file we want to create. It gives us a pointer to a file and an error. When we have a pointer to a file, we now have all of these methods available to us. So these are receivers, the things I'm running my mouse over right here. Pointer to a file, pointer to a file, pointer to a file. Those are all receivers. And so that's how you attach a function to some other type. And and then the other type has those functions available as methods. All right, so that's methods. And when you define a function, you define a func. It's a func, and then you have your receiver, and then you have your look. I've already said it all before. I did this in class the other day. You have your func, you have your receiver, you have your identifier, you have your arguments. I'm going to change that to parameters. You have your parameters, you have your returns. Right, so it could be a return or returns. You could do plural. And then you have your code for the function. So that's like the general signature of functions in Go, how they're laid out. And so the receivers are right there. The identifier is the name of the function, the parameters, and the returns. And that's all covered in the Introduction to Go course. All right, so we got a pointer to a file. And so oscreate gives us a pointer to a file. And then we defer that. We close the file. And we could see that close is one of the methods. And so that's how you could kind of clue in when you have like a certain type. Oh, that gives me a pointer to a file. Oh, close is part of that. I must need to maybe close this if it's including close as one of the methods. So we close that file. And then we copy it, right? From this, we copy this. This gets read and it gets copied into there and it gets written. If we look at IO copy, so I'm going to hold down Command and just fly over that and click it. And in WebStorm, that takes me straight to the documentation, the internals, the source code for the standard library, right? And then these comments, and this is all covered in the, sorry, I got to stop saying that. These comments is where the documentation is built from. So the documentation, the standard library, comes straight from these comments. So I could also get, to learn about the language and see, pretty much the documentation. I could just click on things in WebStorm, which is cool. Now I came here because I wanted to show you that copy takes a writer and a reader. And if we click on writer and reader, like here's a writer and it's an interface. It's from package IO, right? And it has this signature, okay? So does the pointer to a file, that type, when something has that type, does it implement the writer interface? Well, to implement the writer interface, it needs to have this method with this signature. And so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to look, and I look, and I look, and I look, and write b slice by int error, right? int error. There we go, right? And so by that, I know that a file, since it has this method, right, has that method, a pointer to a file implements the writer interface. The pointer to the file implements the writer interface. IO copy wants a writer right there, and since this implements, it's a pointer to file, and since it implements the writer interface, I could put that right there, right? So polymorphism in Go. And then finally, like this wants a reader. So IO copy wants a reader for the second argument, the second parameter. And so here is a string a reader. So to get a string to be a reader, I need to use new reader. And new reader returns a new reader from reading from S. It is similar to bytes, new buffer, string, but more efficient at read only. So I use new reader and give it a string, and it returns a pointer to a reader, right? So that's what I get back, a pointer to a reader. So I'm able to pass that in. And if I wanted to, I could go over to the documentation, and I could take a look at that and learn about that in more detail. So strings new reader. And it gives me a pointer to a reader, and I can look at what a pointer to a reader is. Well, there's type reader. And a reader implements IO reader at, IO seeker. It implements all that interfaces by reading from a string. So that's kind of cool. And once I have a pointer to a reader, right, there's all these different methods available. So we can come up here and look at them all in one place. I like looking at the index for that, right? But here, once I have a pointer to a reader, so new reader as string gives me a pointer to a reader. And when I have a pointer to a reader, there is the definition for the reader interface. And I could come back over here and I could see the definition for the reader interface by going to IO copy, and then right here, what's a reader? There's the reader interface. It's in package IO of the standard library, and it takes read that. So any type that has this method, right? Any type that has that method is implementing the reader interface. That's what an interface is, right? So it's basically defining behavior, meaning, hey, anything that has this, and it's implicit. If you're new to Go and you're trying to learn this without going through the introductory training, interfaces are implemented implicitly. I don't have to explicitly say, implements this interface. So it's implicitly implementing this interface right there, just by having that method associated with this type, a pointer to a type, implicitly implementing the interface. So that's tearing apart OS create, pointer to file, implementing the writer interface, which means I can pass it to IO copy, and I have a string, and I can make the string a reader, which means I can pass it to IO copy. And then the last thing here, and then deferring the close of the file. And the last thing here is just log fatal, and that's interesting to look at too. So I put log fatal right here, and log fatal is equivalent to print followed by a call to OS exit 1. That's cool. All right, so that's log fatal. So it exits your program after it prints. All right, so that's OS create, and func file, pointer to file. What does that take me? File close. That takes me to close. So just saying, hey, we got to close that file, and then log fatal, and then IO copy. And so there's IO copy and information about the writer interface and the reader interface, and it implements the writer interface and allows string to implement reader interface and strings new reader, right? So we could learn a little bit about that. Just looking to see where that takes us. Strings, package index, and reader, pointer to reader. There we go. Takes a string, new reader. There we go. We're in the strings package. All right, so some pretty cool stuff. I hope that review is helpful. And it can take a little bit of time just to sort of understand how everything works together and connects. But once you start to see that pattern, and the pattern is really sort of like, we did OS create. First, we came down here to file and OS create, and it gave us a pointer to file. Cool, I got a pointer to file. What methods are available, right? Okay, look at all these methods that are available. Does it implement the writer interface? Yeah, it's right there. Right? Does it implement the reader interface? Yeah, it's right there. Okay, anything that takes a writer and reader can take this type, which is a pointer to a file. Once you kind of understand how that stuff's working, that helps a lot in Go. All right, so that's the next step that we just took in figuring out how to do web programming in Go. Pretty cool.